and I want you to cast your nets for a catch. Now, even though he had been out with his partners all night long and fishing, and I like Peter because Peter is sure to mention that to Jesus, Peter does what the Lord wants. He goes out, puts his boat out in the deep water, casts his nets. And I've got a lot of respect for Peter here because honestly, I can remember when I was a teenager in high school, I took my best friend out fishing for the very first time. He had never been fishing before. And I'd take him catfishing. We'd go out in the middle of the night. We're talking like, 11 o'clock at night. We'd stay out till, wee hours in the morning. We'd go out and catfish off of the bridge near my house. It ran over a creek. And I can remember I'm on this bridge, literally arguing with my friend over the right way to actually fish. I mean, it's sad, but that's the truth. And so I got a lot of respect for Peter because Peter really doesn't argue with the Lord. He just says, okay, Master, even though we've been out all night, we'll go and cast these nets. Peter does it. And according to Luke, the catch of fish that was brought in when Peter obeyed the Lord was so great. First, their nets begin to tear. The weight of the fish are just way too much for these nets. So they start to tear, and Peter starts calling out to his buddies, James, John, you guys got to come help me out. I'm losing my nets here. We've got this huge catch. And James and John, they come and they start helping him out. And as they did, their boats began to be filled with so many fish, they started to sink. And so if you guys can imagine this onslaught of fish that these guys are catching, it's really a miraculous sight. And Luke says everyone who saw this was amazed at the great catch of fish here. Well, today I want to take a look at the reaction of these fishermen and their relationship to Jesus, because this biblical account is relevant to you and I today. We're just not reading a Bible story just to read and go, well, that's nice that it happened. Tonight I want us to leave here understanding that we can learn an awful lot about our own lives, about our own reactions and our own relationships with Jesus, looking at this story. So first I want to take a moment and take a look at the fishermen and the master. Now when Jesus asked Peter to cast his nets out into open water, Peter tells him that he and his partners, they had been out fishing all night long. So the first thing that we see is these guys had been out fishing all night. And Peter says they didn't catch anything. I mean, this was their livelihood. This was how they put food on the table. This is how they kept their families provided for. They'd been out fishing all night. And Peter says, Master, we didn't catch anything. I mean, in all reality, we could probably look at their night of fishing, the previous night of fishing, and go, it was a total failure. They're out there working so hard, and it was hard work. We're not talking about casting a hook and sitting back and watching it for, 15, 20 minutes, hoping something jiggles it because you're getting too bored. These guys, this was back-breaking work. These guys were, working very hard on these boats or on the shoreline, whatever the case was. So they've been out working so hard, so long, to get nothing. You want to know something? We all have those moments in our own lives when it just seems like you are like running on a treadmill and you're getting nowhere. That you're working so hard and yet you're not seeing the fruits. You're just not seeing any real production out of what you're doing. And sometimes we even get to start feeling like a failure. I want to introduce you guys to someone you may have heard of him. Abraham Lincoln. I want to tell you a little bit about Abraham Lincoln, his history. Abraham Lincoln led a very difficult childhood. He had less than 1 year of formal schooling. In 1831, Abraham Lincoln had a business fail. He was defeated for the legislature in 1832. He had another business fail in 1833. He was elected to the legislature in 1834, and you'd think things are looking up for Abe. Well, the next year, his fiancée died. He was defeated for the speaker position in 1838. was defeated for elector in 1840. He married a burdensome wife in 1842. She had a lot of issues, and it was very difficult for him as a husband. Only one of his sons would live past the age of 18. Abraham Lincoln was defeated for Congress in 1843. He was elected to Congress in 1846, only to be defeated for Congress in 1848, was defeated for the Senate in 1855, was defeated for Vice President in 1856, was defeated for the Senate in 1858, before he was finally elected President of the United States in 1860. I mean, Abraham Lincoln, one of the most beloved presidents in our history, and arguably, the argument can be made, he was the best president in U.S. history. Imagine how different our country would look today if Abraham Lincoln just called it quits, got tired of failing before running for president in 1860. We all have our days when it just seems like we work and we work, but we get nothing for it. So not only do they fish all night, the next thing we see in verse 5 is they do what's right. Peter does what's right. Even though he had been out fishing all night, even though he really failed and just didn't have a good night, and he was undoubtedly extremely exhausted from his night of fishing, Peter does as Jesus instructs. Sounds pretty simple, right? Jesus tells him to do something, Peter does it. Jesus says, cast your net. And Peter says, how deep? Sounds easy. But is it always so easy for you and I? Is it always so easy for us to read what Jesus tells us to do in the Bible? Is it easy for us to just go out and do it? Consider what a guy, his name is Vance Havner. Vance Havner, he was a preacher. He was a revivalist. I mean, this guy was big in his day. And Dr. Havner, on this particular subject, Christians doing what they've been told to do, this is what Dr. Havner says. You have not really learned a commandment until you have obeyed it. The church today suffers from Christians who know volumes more than they practice. In other words, Dr. Havner says, you don't really, truly learn a commandment of the Lord until you do what the Lord says. And in his opinion, our churches today, man, they're just full of Christians. Got a lot of knowledge up here. We got a lot of Bible knowledge. But unfortunately, we're not practicing what we're preaching. We're not practicing what we're learning. Our faith doesn't really have much in the way of feet. Peter here, I love this. In this particular passage, he acknowledges Jesus' authority when he obeyed the Lord. He referred to Jesus in the term master. Now that term master there, it's a Greek word that Luke uses, and really it's a word that he only uses in the New Testament, and it's always used to address Jesus. And it's a word that commonly means supervisor or overseer. Boss. Think of it like that. You see, Peter, in his reaction to Jesus, in his obedience to Jesus, he verbally acknowledged Jesus was the master, and then he practiced what he preached.